Across Africa today, a quiet but dangerous political storm is forming, and at its center stands Ibrahim Traoré. To millions of young Africans, he represents a rare voice of defiance against a system they believe has trapped the continent in endless borrowing and dependency. To powerful interests that benefit from that system, his words have become unsettling, even threatening. The tension began when Traoré openly questioned how African governments continue to take massive loans for infrastructure projects that appear wildly overpriced and stretched across generations. In one of his most controversial criticisms, he pointed to projects where a simple two-lane highway is financed with sums approaching $100 billion, with construction periods lasting up to 10 years and repayment periods extending 60 years into the future. His question was blunt and uncomfortable. How does it make sense to bind unborn generations to debts for a road that will likely be redesigned or rebuilt 5 or 6 times before the loan is fully paid? To Traoré and his supporters, this is not development. They see it as a sophisticated form of economic imprisonment, dressed up as progress. Roads rise, ceremonies are held, contracts are signed, but behind the celebration lies a future weighed down by obligations that never seem to shrink. He argues that true independence cannot exist if a nation's budget, policies, and priorities are shaped by creditors rather than citizens. This message has spread quickly beyond Burkina Faso. Across West Africa and parts of Central Africa, young people share clips of his speeches, seeing in them a reflection of frustrations they have felt for years. They look at their countries and see highways that cost fortunes but crumble quickly, power projects that never reach full capacity, and debts that keep rising even when daily life improves little. In Traoré's words, they hear someone daring to say that the model itself may be wrong. But what makes his position especially sensitive is that he does not stop at criticism. He connects debt to a broader vision of African unity and self-management. He speaks about Africans controlling their own resources, producing what they consume, and trading more with one another instead of relying on distant powers. He frames this not as isolation, but as dignity, a continent that decides its future rather than renting it. In doing so, he has touched nerves far beyond his own country. Large loans create large networks of beneficiaries, foreign banks earning interest, multinational construction firms winning contracts, and local political actors who gain leverage and influence through these deals. When a leader questions the logic of those arrangements, he does not merely challenge policy. He challenges profit, power, and long-standing relationships. This is where the story becomes darker. Supporters of Traoré increasingly believe that such a challenge makes him a target. Online discussions and political commentary now circulate the idea that certain forces want him removed, not because he has failed, but because he has exposed something they would rather keep hidden. They argue that when a leader publicly undermines the narrative that endless borrowing equals progress, he risks destabilizing a profitable system. Some even go further. Among his supporters, there is growing fear that what is being prepared for him could resemble the fate of Muammar Gaddafi. They recall how Gaddafi, after years of proposing African financial independence and alternatives to Western-dominated systems, was violently overthrown and killed. In that story, they see a warning that leaders who push too far toward economic independence may be destroyed under the language of liberation or reform. Whether this comparison is accurate or not, it reveals something important. It shows how deeply distrust runs. For many Africans, history teaches that when leaders threaten powerful economic interests, their downfall is often reframed as democracy or rescue, even when chaos follows. Libya's collapse after Gaddafi is cited as evidence that removing a defiant leader does not necessarily bring stability, only fragmentation. This fear does not arise in a vacuum. West Africa has witnessed repeated coups, sudden political collapses, and foreign interventions over the past decade. Each episode reinforces the belief that leadership in the region is fragile, especially when it challenges international norms. Traoré's critics argue that this paranoia is dangerous, that not every disagreement means conspiracy. But his supporters counter that ignoring history is even more dangerous. From another perspective, defenders of traditional development models say Traoré oversimplifies the issue. They argue that infrastructure is expensive everywhere, that long-term loans are standard practice, and that rejecting them could stall badly needed projects. In their view, the real problem is corruption and mismanagement, not borrowing itself. They warn that turning away from international financing risks isolation and stagnation. Yet even this criticism circles back to the heart of Traoré's argument. He is not simply saying do not borrow. He is asking why borrowing has become so opaque and so unbalanced. Why do costs explode far beyond initial estimates? Why do projects take a decade to complete? Why do citizens see tolls and taxes rise while services remain poor? Why are contracts often hidden from public scrutiny? His supporters say the danger lies in normalizing this pattern. A road is announced. A loan is signed. A ribbon is cut. But the debt remains long after the applause fades. Over time, governments spend more servicing loans than improving schools or hospitals. In that sense, they argue, the highway becomes less a path to development and more a monument to dependence. The idea of African unity intensifies this tension. Traoré's vision of collective economic control threatens not just individual contracts but the broader structure of how Africa interacts with global finance. If multiple countries demanded fairer terms, shorter repayment periods, and local control of industries, the balance of power would shift. For international lenders and corporations, that shift would mean reduced influence. Inside Burkina Faso, the stakes are immediate. The country faces security challenges and economic pressure. Traoré supporters see his stance as courage under risk. His critics see it as reckless defiance. Between these views lies a fragile reality, a nation trying to survive while redefining its place in the world. The fear that they want to do him like Gaddafi captures the emotional core of the issue. It is not a legal claim or a proven plan. It is an expression of anxiety rooted in memory. It suggests that Africans have learned to expect punishment for independence. Whether or not any such plot exists, the belief itself shapes behavior. It makes supporters rally harder around him. It makes critics nervous about instability. It makes observers wonder how far he can go before pressure becomes unbearable. What cannot be denied is that the conversation has changed. Debt, once discussed only in policy rooms, is now debated in markets, online forums, and youth gatherings. People now ask not just how much is borrowed, but who benefits, who decides, and who pays in the end. Traoré's speeches have transformed technical finance into moral language. Justice, exploitation, freedom. If his approach succeeds, it could inspire others to renegotiate contracts, to expose inflated costs, and to seek alternatives rooted in regional cooperation. If it fails, it may serve as another cautionary tale of what happens when a leader challenges entrenched systems without sufficient support. Either way, the symbolism is powerful. A two-lane road costing $100 billion is no longer just a project, it is a metaphor. It represents how something simple can become monstrously expensive when wrapped in politics, profit, and secrecy. A 60-year repayment period is no longer just a number. It is a story about generations paying for decisions they never made. And the fear of a Gaddafi-like fate is no longer just about one man. It is about whether Africa is allowed to imagine a different future without violent consequences. It asks whether self-determination will always be interpreted as rebellion, and whether reform must always be met with force. As this story continues, Ibrahim Traoré stands in a dangerous spotlight. To some, he is reckless. To others, he is brave. To many, he is simply asking questions that should have been asked long ago. His challenge is not only to creditors or politicians, but to a mindset that accepts endless debt as the price of development. The real issue, beyond rumors and fears, is whether Africa can build without selling its tomorrow. Whether unity is possible in a world that profits from division. And whether leaders who speak openly about these problems will be allowed to survive politically, or will be crushed under accusations, pressure, and instability. In the end, this is not just a story about Ibrahim Traoré. It is about a continent wrestling with the meaning of freedom. It is about roads that lead forward but leave chains behind. It is about a generation asking whether independence means more than flags and anthems. And it is about whether challenging an old system will bring renewal or retribution. The answer has not yet been written. But the questions are now impossible to ignore.